let's put 2 minutes, let's get tongue-tied and mess that up completely. Let's get 2 minutes on the clock, and of course your time starts now. All right, time is up. Hopefully you've got some answers through, and let's go through. So this is a case that's really pointing towards something like otitis media, but the question in particular is asking for the most important potential diagnosis. What additional aspects of history would point you towards the most important diagnosis? So what are your red flags? What are things you're particularly worried about here? So of course, the big caveat, and this is something that a lot of guidelines will point at, don't presume that a sore ear is... I've lost the light again. Don't presume that the sore ear is instant diagnosis of otitis media. You need to still be looking outside, otherwise you're going to miss potentially important infectious sources. So the presence of any other infectious focus, so chest, urine, any kind of appropriate example in there, I think would get you marks for sure. Likewise, the presence of fever, which is not mentioned in the stem there, loss of appetite, particularly important in a child as young as this. Tied into that as well, the presence or absence of vomiting, lethargy, so activity levels, mentions that there's some irritability, and I really hate that word because it does have specific medical connotations, and I would say this is a grisly child, not an irritable child, but that's just me being a bit pedantic. Now, of course, history of cochlear implant. Of course, it's not in the stem there, but it would be something that would be very pivotal, and this is asking for the most important potential diagnoses. And so you would have to presume then that it would be something you would be wanting to know about, and certainly is a part of guidelines from Royal Children's Hospital as well. Remember, if it's not in the stem, it's fair game. If it's specifically mentioned in the stem, it's either presumed to be 100% accurate or should be something that you should be focusing in on. Likewise, if there's any history of immunocompromisation, you would definitely be wanting to know in this child, and if they're regularly voiding bladder, if they're adequately hydrated, and this is a good measure of that. In younger children, you could ask about wetting nappies. In a 5-year-old, they're probably out of nappies by that point. I would hope they're on their way out of nappies, and so probably more appropriate to just ask if they're regularly voiding their bladder. All right, hopefully you've got some good answers, good marks coming through, and let's get to the next question then. Part number 2, let's get 2 minutes on the clock, and your time starts now. right, and time is up. Hopefully you've got some answers through. And this is one of those types of questions that you look at and you say, I see this every other day. Bugger, what are those things I'm looking for? It's an easy trap to fall into. Make sure that you're really thinking through when you're doing these kinds of procedures. We often look in the ear and say, yeah, that's definitely otitis media. Remind yourself, okay, why? What am I seeing here that tells me this diagnosis? So, of course, the first thing is going to be your loss of tympanic membrane landmarks. The fact that you'll have the obscuring there. And there may be a little bit of overlap between that answer there and injection or erythema of the tympanic membrane listed further below. But you will see the loss of landmarks there, and you can see even, if I can get the laser pointer working, there it is, we can actually see here where we've got this coming up almost vertical. In infection, that line moves much more horizontal. And so there's some of the things that you'll be looking out for, of course. Now, tympanic membrane bulging. That's one I think most people would also be happy to get, and using the example here of the normal tympanic membrane versus the quite obviously acute otitis media membrane, you can see there's definitely that bulge of the membrane with all that pressure behind it. Tympanic membrane opacification, you can see that cloudiness behind it. And again, there may be a little bit of pus visible behind that's actually causing some of that cloudiness. And that can again tie into pus visible behind the tympanic membrane as the next response as well. Now, there could also be perforation with otary. You may actually have a hole in that membrane due to that increased pressure and pus or material coming through there. And that's, again, a positive finding in acute otitis media. And as we've already said, the injection or erythema of the tympanic membrane, and that can be just erythema injection in regards to the prominence of those vessels in the membrane itself. If this is one of those things that you find yourself kind of struggling to remember, again, I'd strongly encourage you to have a look at the clinical practice guidelines from the Royal Children's Hospital acute otitis media section. Of course, the show must go on. We have more questions to get through tonight, so let's put 2 minutes on the clock and your time starts now. All right, time is up, and it feels like every now and then they seem to hand you a diagnosis on a plate. And this is one of those ones I think you're either going to get it or you won't. And look, Demir absolutely smashed it. Well done. This is chickenpox, otherwise known as varicella. You probably would get less marks if you put herpesvirus infection, but this is one of those things that we actually are seeing less and less of. And I have had discussions with medical registrars who didn't know what the diagnosis was, because it's now a more rare disease that we're just not seeing. We're not getting that exposure to. Of course, here we have the classic story of a new, relatively rapidly progressing rash starting on the abdomen, spreading across the rest of the body, associated itch, and usually pretty decent fevers. So 38.4 here. Of course, it's supportive management and making sure they stay nice and hydrated. And poor little bub's going to have a bit of a rough time until that last vesicle's crusted over. So well done, Demir. All right,